What's up, folks? Nate here at Two Wheel Dyno Works. I'm back on the dyno today with our brand new R9, and today we're doing some intake testing. Now, externally, the bike obviously looks identical to how we had it in our last video. You got the full M4 exhaust installed, but underneath that fuel tank and in the airbox is now the DNA Stage 2 lid and filter. That DNA Stage 2 kit completely replaces the top of the airbox with their open lid design and adds in one of their filters. And while it's not a huge top-end performance improvement, it completely overhauls the curve down low and adds quite a bit more power and torque through the mid-range. Now, before we dive into the performance improvements of the DNA Stage 2 intake, let's, as we always do, quickly recap where this bike started from. This is the bike stock. Bone stock. Stock engine, stock intake, stock exhaust, stock tuning, stock everything. Right after we were done breaking it on the dyno, it made just under 107 horsepower and 63.2 pound-feet of torque. And with everything in the engine, the intake, and the exhaust still stock, with the only change made here being our custom ECU mapping on these bikes, you can see that now the bike made 110 horsepower and about 65 2/3 of a pound-foot of torque to the tire on pump gas, with a big healthy 10 horsepower gain out there at about 10,300 RPM. And then when you add the full exhaust to the bike, again the full M4 there being the green line, the bike now makes, with our custom ECU mapping, 116 horsepower and about 67 2/3 of a pound-foot of torque to the tire on pump gas. Okay, so now that I've recapped that as quickly as I possibly could, and hopefully that all still made sense and people were able to follow along, let's dive into what the gains are with the DNA Stage 2 intake now on the bike. The red line there is the bike with the DNA Stage 2 intake installed, the same M4 exhaust, and our custom ECU mapping for this setup. As you can see, out of the peak power area, there's really no change. The bike flows almost identically from 8,000 RPMs all the way to the limiter. You picked up a couple tenths there, but that's really like run-to-run variance. That's not really consequential or worth looking at. What's worth looking at, and why we always recommend this intake, is all of this. The bike now makes a much flatter torque curve, where it, still made great torque, but didn't have a nice linear curve from about 5,000 RPM to about 7,500, 8,000 RPM. These gains here are huge. This is where you're exiting most of the slower corners on these bikes, and that additional torque you absolutely feel when you're out there on the racetrack. In fact, if I highlight and zoom into that area there right around, say, 6,200 RPM, you're talking about a 4 pound-foot of torque improvement and a 5 horsepower improvement. And again, that's where you are normally exiting slow corners on these bikes. So if you've got one of these new R9s, you will absolutely want to pick up one of these DNA Stage 2 intakes as well, because this much smoother curve and that big torque and horsepower improvement down low is a game changer. Now, the important thing to remember here, because it's a little hard to focus on really the ultimate before and after when I've got all the graphs stacked up like that, is how this bike started off, bone stock, and how you guys are going to get it bone stock from your dealership versus how it can be with a couple simple bolt-on modifications and our custom ECU mapping. This is what folks should really be looking at when they're thinking about modifying their new R9. That is how the bike is bone stock versus how the bike is now that it's sitting on our dyno with the full exhaust, the DNA Stage 2 intake, and our custom tuning. You're talking about 10 horsepower gain at the peak, 16 horsepower out there at the top end around 10,300 RPM, and a 6 to 7 pound-foot of torque improvement throughout almost the entire rev range. All of that additional performance from the intake, the exhaust, and our custom tuning, which again does way more than just provide that horsepower. As I said in previous videos, we've completely overhauled the throttle-by-wire mapping, not only just to get rid of the restrictions, but to make sure that the throttle performs in all the different rider modes as it's supposed to from the factory. So you've got a nice, smooth, and consistent throttle response throughout the entire rev range with our custom engine braking maps, which again, we have 2 of. So you've got a custom engine braking table for the tighter, more technical tracks where you need some more engine braking, or some of the more longer flowing tracks where you don't need so much engine braking, and you'll be able to flow through the corners, on top of our custom fuel mapping for the different intake and exhaust combinations, and our custom ignition timing that we've developed for these engines. The bike is completely transformed. This bike, as it sits here on our dyno right now, with all the modifications that we just covered, and our custom ECU mapping, which again, this is just bolt-ons and tuning, folks, is truly the way that these bikes probably should have come out from the factory. But obviously Yamaha is hamstrung by emissions compliance, which is why the initial figures that people have seen didn't look that promising. Everybody was worried that this is not going to be more competitive or a better platform than the outgoing R6, because this truly is the replacement for the R6, folks. But it absolutely is. I shared some figures here months ago off of our MT-09. Actually, it's probably almost a year ago now, when the bike was first announced, the specs were first released, and social media lost their shit, saying that the bike's going to be terrible, the R6 is better, what has Yamaha done? And even then, people were still skeptical after I shared the data off of our MT-09, which again, this is the same engine electronics platform on. But here, I will share it with you now, once again, off of an actual R9, so you can see for yourself just how ridiculous those claims were, and truly how much better of a platform this is going to be than the R6 ever was. So here's what I'm talking about, folks. The red line is the bike that we've been talking about now for the last 5 or 10 minutes. That's our R9 in the current configuration with a full exhaust, the DNA Stage 2 intake, and our custom ECU mapping. In the correction factor that I ran the blue line in, which is a 2019 R6, our bike makes about 116.5 horsepower. This R6 had a full exhaust system, aftermarket velocity stacks, and an air filter. It made 117 horsepower, so yes, just slightly more than the R9 currently does, and obviously revs out way further, but it makes 50% less torque. Now again, I already covered in a previous video that we can actually, when needed, push the rev limiter out on the R9 about another 1,000 RPMs when we've got aftermarket cams in place. We'll get to that later. But the reason I bring that up now is because that sucks up some of that rev gap that everybody wanted to have. Yes, these bikes are never going to rev as high as an R6 because they absolutely don't need to. They make 50% more torque than the R6s ever could. Even the R6 Superbike engines on spec fuel barely made 50 pound-feet. These make almost 70 with bolt-ons and tuning. And if we zoom in here at about 7,000 RPM and focus on that point for a second, you can see that that's the peak torque area for the R9. But the R6 was only making 36 pound-feet back there. The R9 makes nearly double the torque at the same revs that the R6s did. All of that ridiculously improved torque over the R6 platform and the massively better electronics on the R9s just make them so much easier to ride. For your average track day guy, the bike is massively more forgiving than the R6 was because you don't have to keep it revved to the moon and wringing its neck all the time to get it to perform. On the professional rider side of things, all that additional torque makes these things exit the corner so much stronger than an R6 ever could. And you don't have to take my word for it, folks. Again, if you don't want to believe the dyno graphs and the data, that's completely fine. I'm sure there is still a bunch of R6 purists and naysayers out there, but you can just watch Moto America World Supersport and see these things dominating those grids all weekend long. Okay, so now that we've covered all that, if you've got a new R9 and you're looking to get it set up to go do some track day duty this year, when it comes to intake and exhaust modifications and tuning, we've got you covered. This is the setup that you want. Now, obviously, as new exhaust systems and intakes come out, we'll be building custom fuel mapping for the specific airflow characteristics of those kits, but it's probably going to be a little bit. As when I'm shooting this video right now at the start of May, the M4 is the only one available. The DNA Stage 2 kit's the only one available that works with stock bodywork. We'll get to that later. So that's about really all you're going to get for intake and exhaust combinations for at least another month or two, because the Acura exhaust and the Spark exhaust are going to be at least mid-June before they arrive. And we've got some racing to do before those things show up. So we're now going to quickly transition, to those of you that want to dive much deeper into the R9 platform this year, into what it takes to get this thing properly race prepped, because we're going to be competing in the WIMRA and OMRA 750 class with these bikes, because they won't let us in the 600 class, and we're going to go kick some ass. So this is probably the last time you're going to see this bike with a stock bodywork on it, because all of this is coming off, and we're getting the race bodywork installed. The shock, that's going away. We got an Olin TTX for it. The swing arm, that's too short for proper racetrack duty, at least if you're racing at a competitive level. So we're getting the Tracer 9 swing arm on there, which is 70 millimeters longer, and that's exactly what they're using at World Supersport and at Moto America. The stock forks, they're fantastic for stock forks, but we need Olins. So that's what we're going to be installing on there as well. I've got Attack triple clamps that we're going to install. I've got Attack rear sets that we're going to install. I've got the Attack linkage for the long swing arm and the TTX that's ready to get installed. I've got Attack clip-ons, because the stock clip-ons are actually pretty good, but we need the adjustable ones on there as well. And this is really going to become very quickly a purpose-built track weapon. And we're not just stopping with the bodywork and the ergonomics and the chassis and the suspension. The bike needs to make more power if you're going to go racing. The power that we've just covered is all you need for a track day guy. It's a fantastic setup. You will have an absolute blast riding these bikes. But we know that we need to be more competitive than that when we're racing, especially against some of the other 750s out there in that class. So we'll also be installing some cams as well that I've covered previously on the MT-09s to get this thing back up into the mid to high 120s in terms of horsepower and above 70 pound-feet of torque, at which point these things truly become a absolute missile out on the racetrack. So to make sure that we can still do what we need to do, which is provide you guys with the highest quality fuel mapping, along with all the other maps that we modify in our custom ECU tuning, for the various intake and exhaust combinations on these bikes, we've actually got 2 engines for this thing. So we're going to leave the engine that's in the bike right now pretty much stock. So we can go ahead and provide that mapping data for you folks out there as more intake and exhaust systems hit the market for these bikes. Let's face it, 90% of R9 owners are never going to dive into the engine. They're just going to be track day guys. You guys will have a blast with the way the bike's set up right now. But as I said, when we're racing, we need more. So that second engine we'll be doing a lot of our development on with aftermarket cams. In the wintertime, we'll probably actually even split the cases and go into some of the aftermarket pistons, even more aggressive cams that have already been developed for these bikes. We'll be showing you the spec head porting that we'd recommend because we've got a lot of information from some of the teams that have been doing this already. We will go ahead and show you some of the kit head gaskets, obviously increasing compression because the stock compression on this thing leaves a lot to be desired. And with all of that, you can actually end up on pump gas with about 140 horsepower to the tire. So if you're interested in all that race development on this engine platform, obviously like and subscribe to our channel here. I'll be sure to share all of that with you as we do it here on YouTube and on our Facebook groups as well. And if you have any questions whatsoever about doing any of this to your R9, I'm happy to help you out. Please feel free to reach out. support@tooldynoworks.com is how to get a hold of me directly. And if you are looking to get your bike properly tuned and dialed in for your specific intake and exhaust combination, I can guarantee that you're not going to find higher quality tuning out there on the market for these bikes anywhere else than right here at Tool Dyno Works. Our ECU flashing is now available on our website, tooldynoworks.com, for these new R9s for $349.99. Simply purchase our mail-in ECU flashing service, follow the instructions on the site to send us your ECU, and we'll get it flashed and shipped right back out to you the very same day we receive it, and you will absolutely love the huge performance improvements.